Hello, good evening, my students. Welcome to the third lecture, Nations and Society. Okay, society. When you hear the word, you have heard it many times. What does it come to your mind? Society. Society means it is an organization and it has multiple institutions in it. Institutions, like I have already defined you institution, but I'll give you an example that will remind you, like the Congress, like Supreme Court, institutions. Okay, and the people are collectively bound together by the commonality of these institutions. Are you following? Okay, so it's an organization. Collectively, the people are bound together by the bodies in it, that is, institutions in it. Okay, now let's talk about ethnic identity. And before I go talk about ethnic identity, do you know what race is, right? Because people confuse race and ethnicity. Race, it's very biological, right? Race is how one was born when they were born. So it could be Caucasian as a race, an example. Ethnicity is different. First point I want you to remember, because we're going to be discussing a lot of political terms, this one is not inherently political. So ethnic identity is not political. But it's, second point, it's ascriptive. That means it's given to you when you were born. So what is given to you? That is given to you based on what? Based on your language, like my ethnic identity, Tamil. It's based, yes, I am from India, South India, but Tamil is the language I speak. So there are Tamils not only in India, but in Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Singapore. So we form a common ethnic identity through that common language, Tamil. Are you following? Some people will form based on religion. So Muslims, especially there are two types of Muslims, Sunni Muslim, Shia Muslim. So they could form common identity based on their religion, right? And so now it makes people one from another different based on their cultures. So it could be based on customs, it could be based on language, it could be based on religion, and many other factors, ethnicity. So now you understand it's ascriptive, it's not political, and I gave you mine as an example. You could think about your own. National identity. What's national identity? National identity, when I say national, it becomes political. It is inherently political. So it is derived from, often it is derived from ethnic identity. That's right. So national identity, many times people inside a single country, because of their difference in ethnicity, will fight for equality. So I will give my example of Tamils as an ethnicity, and I've never been to Sri Lanka, but the Tamils in Sri Lanka fought for equality against the majority, Sinhalese, Sinhalese, Sinhalese. They are the majority. Tamils are Tamils. Similarly, in Canada, French-speaking Canadians in Quebec fought for equality, and in fact, separatist movement, they want a separate country in Canada because they felt different in ethnic identity compared to the English-speaking one. So language, you following? Yes, creates their national identity for them because their culture itself is different. Okay, French culture compared to British, English culture, the other settlers. Okay. And national identity creates, you could write down, next point is that a belief of belonging to a nation, That's important. that it creates all of them brought together as belonging to a nation. Okay. Now, if it is a nation, not necessarily always national identities creates a nation. I'll come to that. Not always ethnic identity creates a national identity. Not always national identity creates a nation. If there is a nation, then there is a citizenship, right? A citizenship, it is purely political. It's purely political, okay? Citizenship is purely political. Some states will allow you to have multiple citizenships. Like United States allows you to have multiple citizenships. I have some of my students who are Israeli citizens and American citizens. Whereas some states will not allow you to have multiple citizenships. Like, for example, India. When you take the American citizenship, you automatically lose your Indian citizenship. India doesn't allow dual citizenship. There are people I know who have 3 or 4 citizenships because those countries allow them to have multiple citizenships. Of course, there's more complexity there in case of war or other things between these countries. I don't want to go into there unless it's an international relations class because this is a comparative politics. But follow me. So citizenship citizenship leads to patriotism, okay? And we'll talk about patriotism. It's a pride of one's nation. It's a pride of one's nation, okay? And the citizenship also leads to allegiance to the state. Allegiance means what? Loyalty to the state, okay? Now, I told you that citizenship could lead to patriotism, and national identity could lead to nation, but not necessarily, right? Palestine have a national identity. However, they don't have a nationhood. You following me? And so they cannot claim for a citizenship, or they cannot claim for patriotism because they don't have a nation. So Palestinians don't have a nation and they have a national identity on the other hand. So far what I mentioned so far, other than this society, ethnicity, national identity, citizenship, all of them define groups in different ways. That's all, okay? Create different political implications based on the way they define. They create different political implications. And they group people. Oh, ethnic. You're Kurd. Oh, you're Tamil. Oh, you're Ukrainian. So it could be also based on region, right? Or Latino. Okay. So Latino doesn't belong to just one country, many Latin American countries, right? So commonality. Geographic, you could say. Okay. Now, what's the difference? Because people usually interuse nationalism and patriotism. But some scholars show there is a difference between patriotism. Patriotism, I already said, it's a pride in one's nation, right? But nationalism is a little more fervent passion. If I have to say it in simple language, patriotism, you have a pride for your nation. Nationalism is, my nation is better than you. It's more belligerent, okay? It is, nationalism has always thrusting to the front of fervor, okay? And it could lead to war as well. Nationalism also makes people sacrifice their lives for one's nation to go to war. And sacrifice means not just life, but also pay higher taxes, bear any burden. That reminds me of John F. Kennedy's quote, bear any burden, oppose any foe, support any friend. It's a long quote. He's talking about, it's a nationalistic, okay? So keep that in mind. Now, ethnicity have created a lot of national conflicts. The one of them I already mentioned is the Tamils, which fought a civil war against the Sinhalese in Sri Lanka, okay? It ended almost quarter century later in the 21st century. Now, similarly, that was not a successful one. That the minorities were squelched by the majority, and there were allegations of human rights violations as well. But there are successful separations happened, and one of them joined the international community as a new state. Anybody know what I'm talking about? That's right, Sudan, South Sudan. South Sudan. Sudan was a large country in Africa. And if you see the two ethnic identities differences, the South Sudanese are African, okay, black Africans. The North in general are Arabs. So there was a fight. Oil and other factors were involved, but the conflict, civil war, led to division. And South Sudan was formed from the separation of Sudan. Now there's another third one I will mention, another ethnic conflict which didn't succeed. It's Kurds, Kurds, Kurds in Iraq. They don't identify as the Arabs of Iraq. And when Saddam Hussein was a leader of Iraq, he even used chemical weapons against the Kurds. There's a man, Chemical Ali, one of Saddam's relatives, was sent to use Chemical Ali. He got his name because he used the chemicals from helicopters on the people, dumped and killed. It's a genocide on the Kurds. The Kurds still fight for a nationhood, okay? And they have a separate national identity. They have a separate ethnic identity. Now, let's talk about several major conflicts, reasons for major conflicts, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa. Why? Okay, one of them is natural resources. Okay, access to natural resources. So Africa is filled with natural resources in many forms, minerals, timber, you name it, and the conflict, it fuels the conflict because anyone who has access to it, say diamonds or oil and a satellite phone, as they say, then they have access to international markets and they're biased to buy. They get the money that could fuel them the conflict through buying arms and armaments they need to continue the civil war. Now, what are the second reasons? There's a second reason which goes to the colonialization of Africa. When the Western powers in the 19th century, there's a good book called Scramble for Africa, if you want to read just one book to understand. When they scrambled for Africa and went and colonized the African countries, they divided them into states just like they did in Western Europe. They didn't divide people based on their ethnic identity. They divided it based on latitude and longitudes. What do you think it'll happen? There are people who will identify as brethren with someone across the international boundary because they might be a Hutu, and someone who's a Tutsi very close to them inside their country, they wouldn't find a commonality because of a difference in ethnic identity. Are you following? And one of the famous, infamous, I should use the word, massacre, genocide was Rwanda genocide, which happened between the Hutus and Tutsis in Rwanda. So many civil strifes goes all the way back to dividing international boundaries and making countries of people of different ethnic identities clubbed together. The third reason is authoritarian rules. That is poor governance. Africa has poor governance. Paul Collier in his book Bottom Billion talks about it. One of the 4 causes of poverty in Africa. He's an economist, Oxford-trained economist, talks about it, and it's one of the traps, as he mentions. And poor governance is the big man complex, those who come to power, try to stay in power, authoritarianship, and, well, it even happens in America sometimes, slides there. It doesn't completely go all the way to the authoritarianship. And that stay in power for a long time, as the saying goes, power corrupts, absolute power absolutely corrupts. They will do anything to stay on power and completely create crony capitalism and cooptation, coercion, all this, which we will learn all these words and examples later in a different lecture, but happens. Okay, so now we talked about the major conflicts in Africa and why. I'm going to talk about two other elements, okay, and you're done for the class. But these two elements are important, okay? It's going to take a little time and patiently listen. One of them is political attitude. You heard of it before, political attitude. What is it? What is a political attitude? Thought about it? Political attitude, it's something in the speed of change, rate of change, and the method to achieve it. The rate of change of what? Change of what? Political changes. How fast you want it to be, speed, okay? And the methods you're willing to use to achieve it. Methods means including violence. Not everybody. Some will choose even violence to achieve that change. So let's talk about 4 different types which could be used to divide political attitudes around the world. Okay, and those are, let me draw here. Okay, this whiteboard, are you seeing it? Okay, straight line, center, okay, this is right of me. Here is conservatism, this is center, conservatism. And here is left of center is what? Liberal. And far left of liberal is radicals. And the far right is called reactionary. Reactionaries, conservatives, center, liberal, radicals. Now, let's talk about them. When I say conservative, conserve what? These are people who do not want changes. Okay? They do not want to see changes. They want to slow down. Change is inevitable, as someone would say, but conservatives doesn't want change. Why not, you could ask? They prefer order over change because change could lead to chaos. Some societies have faced chaos. When they try to change things, chaos it results in. So conservatives means conserve, the conservative values. Conserve is to status quo. Okay? Now, what about liberals? Do they want change? Yes, but slow changes. Slow, steady changes. So if I have to, by the way, it varies from country to country. I'm going to say that. How and what do you mean varies from country to country? Don't worry now. But let's use this as example for, say, America. So you will have an idea, pigeonhole some politicians into this so that we could understand. So liberal, Joe Biden could be called a liberal, or Barack Obama, a left of the center. Okay, right of the center could be Marco Rubio, okay, senator who ran for the president in 2016. And what about radicals? Radicals is far left. Well, radicals, do they want change? Yes, they want change. They want change fast, that they are willing to completely change the system because they feel the existing system is not making the change possible. So radicals, the good example would be the Jacobins. This is French Revolution time, who killed the king, guillotine. They brought the guillotine and killed it during French Revolution, right? And who want complete revolution for they destroyed an institution of monarchy. Okay, and they are willing to destroy not only regime, a monarchy, but will be some cases even a state and government. Of course, the government is less institutionalized than the other two, right? You learned that. So government will be gone, regime will be gone, and even state, they will be willing to radicals to use violence as a means. I told you rate of change and method. Okay, method is to use violence to achieve it. Now, if I have to pigeonhole, we don't have that kind of a radical in American society, prominent politicians. Okay, but if I have to pigeonhole far left of Biden, then I would say Bernie Sanders. I do not say he advocates for violence, but when I say Bernie Sanders, he talks about revolution, and he doesn't believe the existing system is letting the changes possible. So he is far left of Biden, who would use the existing system to make the changes. Now, what about the far right? Not the conservatives, the far right. So they don't want change at all, because conservatives are worried about changes because they don't want chaos. These guys want change. Really? Not progressive change, regressive change. Go back in time. Yes. And they are willing to use force, violence to achieve it. Isn't that interesting? Who would you put in there if I have to pick someone, a politician prominent, to put in reactionary? Trump. We could put Trump in that good old days. He has said that many times in the stage. Many of the Trump supporters, when they ask what year, when they talk about going back to good old times, 1950s, they talk about. Some people, scholars say, oh, that's before civil rights. Interesting. So good old times, going back, turning back the clock, and has not hesitant to use violence, as you would see, and Trump people, what they have done in many places, including the march into Capitol Hill. Okay. Now, these are political attitudes, but political attitudes change, I said, between states, right? So a conservative in one state, in one country, will not be a conservative in another place. What do you mean? Yeah, for example, a radical in one country is equal to conservative in another place. A radical, far left, could be a conservative. Radical in one country could be a far right, right of center conservative in another country. In fact, let's compare China and the United States. The Chinese radical is equal to US or Euro conservative. Are you writing this down? A Chinese radical is equal to European or US conservative. And even a Chinese reactionary is equal to US or Euro radical. Even people in comparing the UK or US, they would say the conservatism is in UK is similar to the liberals here. United States, some would say US exceptionalism. American politics have a lot of conservatism in it. Okay. Now I want to talk about ideology. What is ideology? Okay. When I talk about ideologies, that is like a priority of an individual when it comes to how to create a society, balance the society of freedom versus equality. An individual's opinion too. So if I ask, what's your political ideology? Ideology, what ideology? Political ideology, which means your opinion on how to balance. Remember that we talked about the seesaw of freedom and equality the governments have? tried to balance it, right? And your opinion, how it should be balanced. Everybody has different opinions, varies, and we all vote based on it. So let's talk about the different political ideologies. Then you will understand it better. Examples explains things better. Analogies better. Okay. Let's talk about American ideology in general compared to other countries. American ideology, political ideology is liberalism. Liberalism. A liberalism, by the way, this is not political liberal. This is a liberalism with a capital L. Okay, liberalism. Write it down. And in liberalism, freedom is given more priority than equality. In America, freedom is given more priority than equality. Really? Yes. This country was founded on freedom, as some would say. Freedom is a word powerful in American society. I'll talk about the political culture right after this. Okay? I'll come to it. But hang on until then. Liberalism gives higher individual freedom. Individual freedom. When you are giving higher individual freedom, you get compromised on equality. Okay. What about communism? You heard of communism, that word. And some people know socialism, they write and strike, right? Especially people in the right. What does that mean? Communism. Communism, when they're talking about, is a political ideology which chooses equality over individual freedom. Freedom or liberty. You could exchange those words. Individual liberty is compromised in the name of equality and communism. So if I have to draw a table, it explains it better. Just like x-axis, y-axis, let's say high equality, low equality, high freedom, low freedom. Okay? Are you following? High freedom, low freedom at the bottom, high equality, low equality. Let's start from here. First quadrant, it's called. High freedom, low equality, the first quadrant, right? What would it be? High freedom, low equality, liberalism. Liberalism. Whereas, if there's a low equality, let me do the opposite, and then high equality, and low freedom. We just talked about it, so I want to fill this before I go there. Communism. I'll give an example of Soviet Union, Cuba, okay, Vietnam, not Vietnam for a while, and North Korea currently, but North Korea is an authoritarian state, in fact, a totalitarian state. Don't worry. What is the difference? I'll describe that when we talk about authoritarian states. What's the difference between a regular authoritarian and a totalitarian state? But now just follow me. Communism, they strive for equality. We're going to talk about a whole class on communistic countries. Don't worry. Now let's learn the political ideology. Here, what about low equality and low freedom? Sucky. Who wants to live in that country? Okay, that is fascism. Fascism is all about state. It doesn't care about individuals, about the individual freedom or equality of a group of people. Nah, it's about the state. So fascism, a good example of fascism was, everybody know that, Nazis. Yes. And, Mussolini of Italy. That's right. And for them, it's about the state, improving the state, not the people in it. Okay? You know the different state is the one highly institutionalized with its tangible It's like the hardware of the computer, the software is the regime, right? The operator of the computer, I gave the analogy of, that's right, is the government. Come and go. But fascism, it's like the software. Completely say you remove a software of Microsoft and put Apple software. Fascism. These are different softwares. Now here comes anarchy. Anarchy or anarchism. They have high freedom and high equality. Okay? They don't believe in government's role. Okay? Say for here, liberalism, small government, limited government, and markets do it in economic production. Here, strong hand of the government. There's no private property in communism. Private property is eliminated. Okay? Here, fascism is all for the welfare of the state. Individual liberty is not there. And fascism is not there in any countries right now. Okay? And it was strong. Here and there comes. Politicians here could push it to fascistic tendencies. I'll come back to authoritarianism and then I'll talk about that in detail. Now, there's something else which people don't get it, and that's I want you to get. Social democracy come in the middle here. Social democracy. What's that ideology? Social democracy. Social democracy, example, I'll give the example and then I explain, is the Nordic countries, many of them. The Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, all these countries, Nordic countries, they're called, have social democracy. What's that mean? They don't, it's like communism, because when people like Bernie talks about social democracy and then they say socialism, this is like communism, you don't understand. Social democracy is not saying you should not have private property. There is private property. Private property rights exist in social democracies. Government role is stronger in terms of distribution of economic productivity output. That is higher taxation. So for example, Denmark, higher taxation, that taxes up to 50% will go towards creating equality. So there will be unemployment benefits will be high. Here people during COVID time struggling when they lose jobs. And even in unemployment, $450 or $600 with the federal government support for a little while, and it runs out and people are starving, standing in lines. Whereas in social democracies, the idea is, I'll give you an example, concrete example, rather than talking in theoretical. In Denmark, if you lose job, up to 2 years, 80% of your salary, where do they get the money to pay for that? Because they tax. And some people would say, well, then it will not help free market. Well, they do have billionaires, Nordic countries, okay, IKEA and Legos. So you could, they're small, okay. Finnish population is like 5-6 million people. That's like a state population here, okay. Normal average state populations. And some states are lesser than that. New York State is higher than that. So to compare to United States, it's different in scale. But we're talking about in ideology, political ideology, social democracies. Some people will point out that they are more happier, which we will talk about totally in a different class, about happiness and how government plays a role. And government like Bhutan, happiness is their objective rather than GDP. So United States, GDP, gross domestic product, free market productivity. Government is not doing the production, market is doing the production. But Bhutan doesn't keep that as the score to measure the well-being, how they're doing, the happiness of the people. So Bhutan is one of the happiest countries in the world, okay? We'll talk about that later when we talk about the topic of happiness. But the point of discussion is social democracies try to create equality, but it is not destroying private property. It does have private property, but a stronger role of government than compared to what? Compared to liberalism, which is the Western democracies like UK or US. Are you following? Now, we talked about, so there's commonalities between anarchist and libertarian. Libertarians believe in small government. Anarchist doesn't believe in government at all. But anarchists and libertarians, have you heard of Bitcoin? Yes. So libertarians and anarchists will agree on that, of Bitcoins. So the point I'm trying to make is overlap sometimes ideologies. Okay, good. Now let's talk about political culture. Political culture. What's the culture? The word culture itself, many would know. Ruth Benedict, she's an anthropologist, cultural anthropologist, who coined the term. And all you saw, that's their culture. That's their culture. And Margaret Mead was her friend, and these are towering intellectual women in the 20th century created that idea of culture. Political culture. What's the political culture, and how the political culture have an impact in differences of society? Okay, so now political culture, the first one point to write is it's the content. Political culture is the content of the institutions that help a society. It's the content of institution that help a society. And culture acts as a roadmap to where the society should go. That is, in other words, examples always explain things better. I'll give you examples. There is this beautiful book I've read a while ago. Okay, David Fisher Hackett. He's a Boston professor and Brandeis University professor, historian, and he compared New Zealand to that of the United States. And he titled the book Freedom and Fairness. You already probably got it, which country is all about freedom. United States. The people came here, the white settlers, for religious freedom. And freedom is a very powerful word used by both the left and the right in America. In American political culture lexicon, freedom is like the WBC, carrying oxygen, I would say. Okay, people get goosebumps when they talk about freedom. Why are you fighting in Iraq? Freedom. Not for oil? Are you sure? And it's always freedom is wrapped in debates and discussions, individual freedom. It resonates with an American mind. Whereas if you ask New Zealanders, white settlers went from Great Britain more than 100 years after white settlers settled in the US. It's a small pocket. When they left to New Zealand, where did they leave? They left for a reason called fairness. And the society now, 21st century, both the left and right care about fairness more. Fairness more. And they have about 4 or 5 dozen words in English language on fairness, like square deal, other things which were used by Teddy Roosevelt time, early 20th century. They have words which politicians on both aisles use it to inspire people, and that is their pulse, that is their WBC, okay, or RBC, red blood corpuscles, hemoglobin, which carries the oxygen. The pulse of the country is in freedom. And the entire book talks about how they treated the natives more fairly compared to Americans in the name of freedom. Okay. And even though American strong current is freedom, if you look at it, the greatest presidents of the United States almost always went for fairness. You could talk from Lincoln to Roosevelt to, all the big names. They all stood for fairness, but it's very hard, and they create changes, dramatic changes, I would say, in the political society of the United States. But not often we are lucky to get that kind of leaders to create such a wonderful changes. Now, even inside America, political cultures are created based on the origins, because I talked about white settlers coming to America and white settlers going to New Zealand. Even inside the United States, in the small states, it depends on where they came and settled, the white settlers, and it has an impact. Like I'm teaching from New York City, Manhattan, and Manhattan has its own culture. It's different from the rest of the country. The Dutch settlers came and started here. The Dutch settlers, which even when Manhattan was started, so many languages were spoken. It's driven by economic propositions. And Wall Street is right here. Even then, Stuyvesant, the colonist, the Dutch colonist, the leader, it's about business. It's a business colony. And there were people of different backgrounds speaking different languages. And if you go to New England states, they're called New England for a reason, because they are people, settlers from England, and they strongly believe in the role of federal government, the government's ability to make changes. That's a political culture. And so still, if you see, they vote predominantly Democratic, the New England states. That's because they believe still the government can do real good. Whereas the southern states in the United States were settled by Scottish and Irish background. There's a wonderful book called Black Rednecks, White Liberals. Yeah, the opposite way. Yeah. Black Rednecks, White Liberals. Written by Thomas Sowell, an economist, conservative economist in Stanford University. It opened my eyes to see this differently about the political culture lingering from the settlers of the time. You go to New Orleans, still the French culture is there. But for those who have been to New Orleans, you know what I'm talking about. And similarly, the Virginia plantation is more of an aristocracy, slave-holding aristocracy, tidewater culture that still lingers. And so the cultures doesn't change easily. It changes the people who live in the community, political cultures. Okay? And so keep that in mind when we go into our next discussion. I want you to watch this film I put for you to understand ethnic conflict very well, and which is a true story, and it's a very good movie. IMDb rating of 8.4 or 8.3, which is pretty good. And we'll go from next lecture. Bye.